Hello and welcome to my vlog, Who Knows Best. My name is Joe. You probably know that if you follow me. Anyway, you'll see no green screen behind me. My Diet Coke's over to the side over here. But anyway, so today is the fifth Sunday of Easter, and the journey towards Pentecost has been a beautiful one. It's giving us time to recognize that Jesus Christ is in our lives, and that we need to trust and hope about what comes next. So the two videos, and if you follow me, I do these little videos with permission. And these two videos that I'm showing are just inspiring, I think, but also deep and reminding us that sometimes we don't know where we're going. Sometimes we need to trust and we need to hope and recognize that Jesus Christ is the cornerstone of our lives, and that but but that we are part of the building of Jesus Christ. We are part of the building of God. We are part of the church. And when I say church, I mean universal church, not just a church, not just a building. So God bless, and I hope you enjoy these two videos.
Faith doesn't usually begin with clarity. It begins when the path ahead disappears and the fog rolls in. When answers stop. When certainty fades. When all you can see is where you're standing now. Faith isn't knowing how it ends. It's taking the next step anyway. Not because you can see the whole bridge, but because you trust what's holding you. Faith releases the demand for proof and chooses trust instead. Because God never asked us to see the future, only to follow Him into it. Faith doesn't remove the fog, it moves through it. And every step taken in trust reveals what fear could never show. Faith isn't seeing the other side. It's trusting the bridge and walking forward anyway.
Life has a rhythm. A pattern we fall into without thinking. Up and down. Some days feel like progress, momentum, forward motion. Other days feel like we're losing ground. We measure our lives by movement, by how high we climb, how fast we advance, how far ahead we think we are. But motion doesn't always mean growth, and effort doesn't always mean direction. Sometimes we're carried by the current. Other times, we fight it. And sometimes, we just stand there, hoping it takes us somewhere better. But what happens when the movement stops? When the climb stalls? When life doesn't take us where we expected? Scripture tells us the way is narrow, not automated, not effortless, because following God isn't about going up or down. It's about walking with Him, step by step.
I love those videos, don't you? Thank you, and for coming and joining me here again today. God be with you always and in all ways, like I like to say. Anyway, as usual, I want to share my personal side, and I know sometimes it can be annoying, but my life, I've always found God working in strange ways in my life, and I always like to share that with you. So again, I hope you don't mind, but if you do, you'd probably just shut me off anyway. But anyway, I don't know if many of you know this about me, but a few years ago, I had left the seminary. I decided I wasn't going to be a priest, and I had a degree in psychology, and I became a therapist. The title was a mental health associate, and I worked for a local hospital. And my specialty, not my specialty, but my area that I worked with were men and women who had attempted suicide, right? And part of that, some of them was multiple times, and people don't realize how impactful that is that, and how devastating that is that not only did they attempt suicide, but they failed at committing suicide. And that in and of itself caused a double whammy for many of them in their lives. They felt like failures. And I always felt called to bringing hope into their lives in whatever way it can. Now, my job mostly was to run therapy groups throughout the day, mostly with the men, but sometimes with men and women. And it was about 6 hours a day, give or take. There was lunch breaks and different whatever. About 6 hours a day, I was with them. And being the youngest in the group, the youngest therapist, the youngest mental health associate, my job was also to ride the bus, to make sure the bus ride home was safe and secure for the clientele. And the doctors at the hospital believed that it was imperative that we do not talk about faith or religion. That the doctors felt that it could be hurtful to them, to the clients, because it's fantasy thinking, is what they said. So even though I was a man of faith, I followed the rules that were set out. And I did this day in and day out for years. The job was rewarding, and I never got tired of it. I loved it because even though progress was slow, you could see at times some success stories. And sometimes the success was as simple as the fact that they showed up the next day. Okay. And I know, again, it sounds crazy, but that was a win that they were there. Okay. Now, fast forward a couple of years. I left the job and to go back to the seminary to continue my path to priesthood. And that path to priesthood, that's a story for a whole other day. But one Sunday afternoon, it was funny. I was in the card store buying an anniversary card for somebody. I even forget who that was, and as I'm looking through, the different ones, and as I'm looking through, I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was a man I worked with in program. Now, obviously, I can't say anything about him. It's clientele. It's a hospital, HIPAA rules. But I will tell you this, as I looked at the man, I didn't recognize him. This is, years later, maybe 10 years later or so. And I'll be honest with you, he was a tough story. And I really didn't think he was going to make it. I hoped every one of them would make it, but there was reality there involved. And this man had already attempted suicide 5 times and failed 5 times. I know some doctors would say, well, maybe they weren't real attempts. Whatever it was, whether it was a call to attention or whatever you want to call it, it was an attempt. Okay. So I really thought, well, maybe one day that attempt, even if it's sometimes it happens that it goes out anyway, whatever. But there he was standing in front of me. And like I said, I didn't recognize him because he was clean cut. He was clean shaven because when he was in program, he was scruffy. He was, didn't shower for days. When you're depressed, that's what happens. And he looked at me and he said, I thought it was you. And I'm looking, and all of a sudden, he comes at me, but with arms like this. And he comes at me and he puts his arms around me, puts his head into my chest because he's a little shorter. And I could feel him crying. His body was shaking. And I just stood there not knowing what to do. Because again, you don't touch, this is an ex-client, I'm not even supposed to recognize him. Anyway, so he said something I'll never forget. He told me that when he was in program, he hated life. He hated everything. And then he said, even hated me. He said he hated me because, get this, he said, because I always seemed annoyingly joyful. Okay. Um, he remembered when moments, we were talking, and he said he remembered when things were tough sometimes in group, because sometimes I had clients that would burst out, would say, uh, would go off and we had to do a takedown or whatever else. And sometimes they were just nasty with each other. Again, tough crowd, tough group of people. And he said he always amazed how I was able to calm things down. And he said that when I left, everyone there found out I was going to the seminary and that I was going to be studying back for priesthood. And he said that's when it clicked for him when I left, ironically. He said that's when he figured out my secret to being joyfully annoyingly joyful. He said, you had faith, you had hope, and you had someone called Jesus Christ in your life. And he said he remembered that because he remembered one day when I went to sit down after one of the ruckuses took place. He said he remembered rosary beads falling out of my pocket. And he was Catholic. He knew what rosary beads were. And he said, back then, he said, I thought you were a simpleton because you use these beads, magic beads, to pray. He said, that's a simpleton does that. He said, but then when I left and he saw what my secret was to a joyful life, he said he decided to test it for himself. He said, so that Sunday, he was testing God. He was angry. He said, and he said, and he went to church, and whatever the priest said, he doesn't remember what the priest said. He just said he remembered something changing in his heart. He felt something cleaning out, purifying. He said, and then he decided the following week to go back. And he lived in one of these group homes, and he was allowed to go. He said, but he was discouraged by the therapist, by the staff of the house, he said. He said, but he kept going, and he insisted on going because he felt better and better and better each week that he went. And maybe it wasn't what the priest said. It was just in the crowd he was with, whatever it was. Or maybe it was Jesus Christ in his life. Eventually, he said he was able to come off medications, get a job, get an apartment, get a girlfriend. He said, and his life just turned around. And the doctors, one of his therapists said, it's almost miraculous. No one thought he would make it. And here he was years later, standing right in front of me. And he said this, he said, life isn't perfect. He said, but I know I'm not alone. He said, Mr. Joe, you saved my life. He said, because you led me to Jesus Christ. And immediately, it's funny because I remember, I guess the therapist or the training inside me says, no, I never talked about religion. I wasn't allowed to. And he said, you never said anything with words, but you said it with the way you treated us. You said it with the way you lived your life. You gave us hope every day. You showed hope every day. He said, I rejected it. Like, I even hated you for it. But you, or it, was contagious. And I remember just standing there thinking, wow, I never said a word. And that brings me back to today's gospel where Jesus says, we are the building blocks. He is the cornerstone, but we're building something here. And he says, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. In other words, he doesn't just talk about God, he shows us God. And I think sometimes we believe that we have to have all the right words, or that we have to give the perfect explanation, or convince someone somehow. But maybe a lot of time, it's simpler than that. Maybe it's about how we live our lives, how we show up for people, how we treat people, the peace we carry. Because whether we believe it or not, people are watching. The other day I'm driving my Uber, you guys all know I drive Uber. And I think I have a sign in front of my car that says, please cut me off. Because that day, for some reason, 3 different cars cut me off. And 2 of the passengers had said to me, because I make it a practice not to yell and scream because I realize they can't hear me. The guy who just cut you off, the person who just cut you off, they don't hear you. But the person behind me says, "How do you stay so calm?" I said, "What am I going to do?" And I have a pair of rosary beads hanging. And one person said, "Isn't that sacrilegious?" And I said, "No, because when you're not in the car, I get to pray. I get to grab the beads and pray." And those rosary beads right there remind me to do it. That's not just decoration for me. Maybe for some people it is, but for me, it's not. For me, it's a reminder of faith, hope, and love, and the way we need to treat people. And sometimes, as I'm driving, I just grab the cross of the rosary beads. People watch us, even the ones who push us away, even the ones who reject us, like this gentleman who hated me. They still see something in us. I wasn't trying to change anyone's life back then. I was just trying to show up, to do my job, but to care about the people right in front of me. But looking back now, I could see something else was happening. I was helping to build something like Jesus says in the gospel today. Not with words, wasn't allowed to do with words, but the way we live our lives. Again, that's what today's readings are all about. We're not just called to believe, but we're called to build, to be a part of something bigger, to be, as scripture says, living stones. Maybe the question for all of us today is this: what are people seeing when they see us? Because you might not say a word, but your life might be saying everything. So let's go out and build something that reflects him. Make it count. God be with you always and in all ways. Love you. A few people have asked how they can support this ministry of these vlogs. So if these reflections are meaningful to you in any way, if you'd like to support this ministry, there's a simple way to do so. Thank you for being a part of this. You can follow the QR code, or you can follow the link. I don't know if I put them up or if I put them down, wherever I put them. But thank you for being part of this. Thank you you don't have to contribute, but if you want to. But thank you just for reading this, watching this. It truly means a lot. God bless.